This sort of slightly challenging position of kind of following those two amazing talks, and I hope that you'll see that there are lots of kind of resonances and connections across that are already kind of buzzing around in my brain. But I'm just going to kind of plough on and talk about kind of a really personal project, actually. And in this project, kind of for 2 years, I worked with a group of women at a third sector family support service in Bensham, Gateshead. So kind of as people have already set up over the past couple of days, Gateshead's a place with a strong industrial history. Echoes of that unravelling is still kind of found in a limited jobs market there, and some of the most significant cuts to local authority funding relative to the rest of the UK. Women, I'm working with a women's group, women also disproportionately hit. Okay, so those numbers tell a particular story, but I wanted to make or find some other stories, and this kind of taps into the stuff that Rebecca was talking about earlier. So as part of a broader research project, participants and I used a range of drama games, improvisation techniques, images, movement work towards the development of a fictional script. I wrote the script based on characters and situations that we explored together, but also drawing on discussions, observation and interviews. Okay, and twice along that process we brought professional actors in to kind of perform the scripting process back to the group to receive comments and feedback. And a little plug, we've just been given some money to stage it, which is brilliant news. So coming up, thank you. Oh, I wasn't expecting that. So kind of what I want to talk about today is the challenge of representing austerity, the challenge of dramatising austerity in this play, as I kind of echoing some of Esther's points, as I kind of did or didn't find it in the process. The challenge perhaps of making a scene when the plot keeps falling apart. And this taps into kind of some of the work that Ben Anderson and I have been doing on the scene and on concepts of dissonant realism. So I kind of came to this project from a drama background, and with an interest in kind of the plays of the North East that I loved. Plays like Alan Plater's Close the Coal House Door, that's an image from Close the Coal House Door there. Tom Hadaway's The Filleting Machine, and Lee Hall's The Pitman Painters. These plays are all about kind of work and industry, us and them, what it means to belong and experience together. In these plays, you kind of know what your neighbour's going through, and if you don't, then they're probably a scam. And so these plays had a kind of strong plot, but amidst a mini resurgence, I kind of wondered why these plays were being performed now, and if not, how to kind of narrate the rise in fractured and precarious work, and by that I mean kind of paid and unpaid precarious work, as this becomes entangled with an austere state. So these relations between work and the state are less conducive, I thought, to kind of proven narrative structures, because objectives often became diffuse and disparate. So kind of the question I was asking myself was, how do we make this story resonate whilst being true to the complexity of this current condition? And so working through some of those questions in this paper will bring me to where I've kind of settled for now, which is in this concept of suspended dissonance. And this concept, I think, both holds on to and unravels austerity, as I found it lived in fragmented and contradictory ways. So where then should austerity sit in our play? Was it a character? Was it a setting, an environment, as Esther put it? An atmosphere? Perhaps it should be found in the form as well as the content of the script. I was kind of caught in this relation of cruel optimism because I was trying to find kind of an absolute expression or gesture to encapsulate austerity perfectly. And of course, during those 2 years in Bensham, kind of cutbacks and pushes forward resulting from the reduction and reform of state spending on welfare and services did make their presence known. But how? As a mother and daughter noticed an empty flower bed, as a taxi no longer takes a disabled child to school, as a woman is moved from income support to job seekers allowance, or more accurately, in the combination of national and localised workfare that followed that, in the withdrawal of legal aid in a custody case, in a sense of satisfaction for making ends meet, in a closed autism support group, in the choice between food and heating. Okay, so even amongst this small group of women who are kind of in a supposedly shared demographic, austerity's effects surfaced in different ways at different times and in different places. So what might those moments or kind of more than moments mean as a scene or fragments of scenes? As an event or fragments of the event of austerity? When and how do they become felt? And I think this taps into kind of some of the stuff you've been thinking about, Esther. So for me, sometimes the effects of austerity act as a shock from the outside. Sometimes they escalate over space and time, crossing those thresholds or tipping points, perhaps a little like David Bissell's Stressed Bodies and Laurent Blant's Slow Death. Sometimes they rumble along in the background. Sometimes they make things feel better. Sometimes they go unnoticed. And sometimes in austerity's multiplicity, kind of all or some of the above kind of become held together at once in tension. So how do you make a story out of this? Or how do you bring this into our story? So I began kind of thinking about different devices that I might be able to use. And I started off by thinking, okay, as an escalation of these moments and more than moments, austerity becomes a settling or an atmosphere in the play, something that bodies are immersed in. And I was kind of thinking how to stage that, and I came up with this idea that I was really invested in and I was really passionate about. And I was like, yeah, austerity is like a kind of smog. And there's lots of logical reasons why that seemed to work. So it's like, yeah, austerity escapes its cause. It gets everywhere. It's disorientating, it settles, and it muddies connections between people. There's a little slide of the smog there. It's breathed and it gets inside different bodies differently, and its harm might escalate over time. And then I kind of thought, actually, this kind of isn't quite right. Not only because it all felt a little bit too pretentious. There was kind of something that I liked about austerity as a relation between things shared and difference. But actually, smog felt like it had a bit too much consensus. It didn't get at that difference between a shock from the outside and a rumbling along in the background. It didn't capture austerity's kind of seductiveness and its kind of felt rewards and the promises that it appropriates. Further, for the women at the time of my research, and I'm Harrod, I was kind of screaming when you asked that question, because it's like, yes, for the women at the time of my research, austerity wasn't described as being everywhere. So when I asked them directly, several participants applied along the same lines. I haven't got the first idea because I don't even know what it means. I don't read the papers, that's a good start, isn't it? Although often those same women would go on to describe one reform or another in a great deal of detail. So I think there's more to understanding this than kind of recognising that felt austerity is a different thing to named austerity. But either way, whatever this thing was, it wasn't kind of one shade of colour, grey, or lots of shades of a different texture, slightly wet. So then, drawing on one participant's past experience and kind of other conversations that we had in the group, we imagined the character of austerity as a discreetly controlling partner. So we thought how his harm is spatially expansive. He can enter the home, he can follow you on the bus, he's outside school, he disrupts friendships, he buys her flowers and then expects something she can't give in return. And new literature on coercive control seemed to resonate with women's descriptions of being kind of pushed into making an unactionable decision and punished for not acting on those unactionable decisions. So, for example, through pressure to find jobs that just aren't available or can't be managed alongside other care commitments. There was something in the entrapment of coercive control, and in the violence women seem to turn on themselves and each other sometimes. So just to give one example, one woman had made 300 applications and she'd received 5 interviews. And then later on in the conversation she was saying, why should I get a benefit for sitting around doing nothing when other people have got to go to work? So there's kind of something useful in the kind of the personal and the political and coercive control as well. Something useful in the expansion of abuse from intimate bodies to a broader community. There was lots of resonances, but again, we were really cautious about this. We were cautious about undermining the closeness or intensity of other forms of everyday terror. We didn't want to reduce or homogenise coercive control. But I did kind of become invested in this because it offered a promise of a dramatic solution. It gave us a clear super objective for the audiences to invest in. So if we can get this woman out of this relationship, then we'll find resolution. But actually that was kind of the problem with the concept. Within the limits of the fictional script, to the audience, if not to the character and the victim in that relation, then then this mode of relation was kind of somehow too coherent. You know, the victim, the controlling partner was too easy to vilify almost, and that meant that the lines between inside and outside were too clear. And again, this didn't quite get at the lived experiences of austerity that I encountered, whose promises were much more fragmented, and whose lines between inside and outside were much more blurred. So solutions or escapes were often temporary and often folded back into this thing, austerity. So for example, an outside to pressures associated with job seekers' allowance may be imagined in the promise of a job offer, but that precarious and low-paid work may feel just as damaging as unemployment. The inside may be displaced to a challenge of care, and the job may be lost once more. So these are the kind of promises that appeared throughout the process. So less immigrants, winning a bid on a council house, carefully balancing the budget, just getting on and getting by. These promises were attached to in a way that some kind of outside to austerity just wasn't, at least at the time and place of my research. So for women whose economic lives were precarious before austerity, just as you were saying, Anne Howard, this wasn't just a matter of kind of consciousness raising, I didn't think. It wasn't a matter of kind of making people understand that those things getting worse are doing so as a result of a political or economic strategy. This kind of fails to get at the effective rewards in austerity, even if they become in tension with effective discomforts. So I kind of found moments of relief and displaced optimism during this process, where austerity kind of was and wasn't present. For example, one woman with a significant amount of personal debt took great pleasure in kind of moments of micro-entrepreneurialism, finding a glitch online and saving £25 on the weekly shop, selling some goods on eBay. It kind of feels good to imagine that you're taking control financially. But as she put it, she would just spend the money again afterwards. So the reward of spending and rewards in saving were able to kind of coexist in tension. They kind of propped each other up and producing what I think, after Lauren Balance, is a kind of impasse. So I love this image, the impasse in Lauren Balance, where it refers to kind of the effort it takes just to stay afloat. Legs and arms paddling frantically, unseen under the water, as her head bobs around and around on the surface. And she kind of brings that into relation with a cul-de-sac. So you imagine like somebody swimming round and round a cul-de-sac and not moving anywhere. And that kind of just staying afloat for Ballant becomes a political act. So other political acts become folded into the impasse. The amount of detailed understanding women had, or at least perceived themselves to have, about one another's different encounters with welfare and services seemed at once kind of contrary and not to this absence of austerity as a named thing. And further, it became kind of tangled up with cycles of micro-othering and micro-care. So, for example, one single parent who was out of paid work and on benefits described to me 3 subcategories of single parents on benefits. So we think of this kind of benefit stream as kind of a kind of homogenising othering, but what I found was kind of much more complexity, like much many more nuances there. So she said to me, I think sometimes there's different sets of single parents. Like, there's single parents just because they want kids, but they don't want a partner. There's single parents that you've been married for years and marriage dissolves. And then like single parents that you've had a child at 16, but they've never worked and we're all chucked into the same barrel. They don't take people's circumstances into consideration. And this woman was talking about what she called swollen belly syndrome. So she'd predicted that once job seekers' allowance was brought down to a child being age 5, that all of these parents would get pregnant, and this is what happened in order to avoid being kind of put onto this move. And so what that kind of enabled her to do was kind of separate herself from those other single parents. And this enabled her to kind of continue her own investment in the promise of an outside that would be found once she accessed paid work. So this displaced a promise in the outside of austerity to being outside austerity's more violent rhetoric. And also the inverse also plays out and rubs alongside this. So, for example, another woman stated, I haven't got to worry about the bedroom tax and anything like that. But it's just so sad when you hear about people and they're having to move out of their houses. And they haven't got anywhere to move to that's smaller. And they're getting rid of all these flats up in Gateshead as well. I think they're just too quick to knock things down instead of just doing with what they've got. So this participant was kind of able to position herself at once inside and outside the effects of the bedroom tax, as she kind of recognised that violences in her community were personal. So these kind of registers of micro-othering and micro-care, for me, became kind of gestures towards an outside of austerity without actually imagining or moving towards that outside of austerity. And for me, this became a very specific mode of the impasse. Sorry, I just missed a few slides like that. Stretch Armstrong. This became a very specific mode of the impasse that is what I've called suspended dissonance. So I imagine here one of these stretchy toys where you pull the arms and legs in different directions, and amidst all that stretching, the body stays still. Interestingly, there are no stretchy women images on Google, and searching for that is not a good idea. Okay, so those kind of moments that I described earlier on suddenly become these decisions. So heating or food, othering or care, spend or save, job seekers allowance or jobs that can't be found, moan about it or have a laugh, care for a sick parent and leave them to it and work to pay the bills, give up a custody battle or represent yourself, plant the seeds yourself and face action from the council for doing so, or leave the flower beds empty. And the point that I'm kind of trying to make here is that those decisions are not dichotomous. There is no kind of one or other solution. There's no outside that can be found by making the right decision. And so for me to return to kind of the original question of how do we make a story from all of this, the answer kind of came through form. So the story is in the suspension of resolution from dissonance itself. It's actually in the absence of a kind of conventional narrative structure that involves conflict and momentum towards resolution. So to kind of make a bit more sense of this as an idea, I draw on the concept of cognitive dissonance, but only in the abstract. So cognitive dissonance refers to pressure to resolve a situation of inconsistent cognitions. So cognitive dissonance then is kind of momentum towards a resolution. Suspended dissonance removes that momentum towards. So instead I was kind of thinking about dissonance as you find it in music. This refers to a kind of ongoing discord. So through music we can hold on to dissonance as something felt, not just something that's cognitive. And in music, dissonance is the property of attraction or repulsion between notes of a different pitch that gives rise to a sense of instability or restlessness. But perhaps in the context that I'm imagining it, that kind of instability and restlessness almost becomes stability. It becomes the norm, it becomes lived with. So suspended dissonance refers to discord without movement towards resolution. Conflict that must be lived with in order to stay afloat. And in the play, we used kind of devices that I hoped captured this idea of this sense of suspended dissonance. Characters' experiences of austerity were held in tension. Multiple optimisms held reward and discomfort together. Undecidable decisions both were and weren't put into action. And I'm going to give you just a little fragment of script that I hope kind of illustrates this idea. Okay, so I think you'll understand that kind of the point is that this scene can't be taken in isolation. This scene doesn't become the perfect gesture to encapsulate austerity, but instead it becomes in tension with other devices in the play, including kind of how we use the set and setting, including dynamics between characters, including structural form. So these things at once gesture towards austerity and hold on to their other modes of becoming. And I hope this kind of creates a sense, at least a move towards how I found austerity, not just kind of not just as fragmented, but also as a process of fragmentation, and kind of how I've been thinking about suspended dissonance as a kind of one particular relation with that. And I realise that this is kind of a little bit of a gloomy talk, And I did write it after the election last week. But I think what's probably understated in that actually is the moments of micro care and kind of what's going on there and kind of other alternatives and other kind of flashes of light that move through this process.